This lecture is on section 1.3, chapter 1. This lecture discusses how data are collected for statistical studies. First, I want to talk about different types of statistical studies. The first type is observational study. It's a study when a researcher observes and measures characteristics of interest of part of a population, but does not change any existing conditions. For example, a teacher observes the number of students who check their phone during a break without letting know the students that they are observing them. The second statistical studies is experimental study or experiment, right? This is a study when a treatment is applied to a part of the populations and responses are observed. And then in this experimental study, there's to be two different groups. One is treatment group. It's a group of subjects that receive treatments, like special treatments, some special conditions that are applied to this group. And then the second group is control group or placebo. It's a group of subjects that do not receive any treatments, do not receive any special conditions. And then the subjects in this treatment and control groups are called experimental units. So then after all, the responses are observed from these two groups, and then the researcher will compare the results between the two groups in order to make any conclusions about this experiment, an experiment. All right, let's look at an example. Example number 9, the study of the effectiveness of influenza vaccine in elders. A group of researchers conducted a study on a sample of 5,013 elders at Washington Nursing Home. Among those 5,013 elders, 3,145 elders desired to take the vaccine yearly. So take the vaccine yearly, and the rest prefer not to. After 4 years, those researchers collected the data of health history of the participants and used some statistical tools to draw some conclusions. All right. And the first question is, what was the topic of interest of this study? So the topic of interest of this study, they want to study the effectiveness of particular influenza vaccine in elders in Washington state. So you know the interest of the study is about study the effectiveness in elders and specifically in Washington state. Okay. And then you can ask what was the target population? The target population should be all elders in Washington state. And what types of statistical study is it? It should be an experiment. The reason is a group of people desire to take vaccine yearly. So this is the treatment group, and the rest refer not to. That means this is the placebo or the control group who do not take any special treatments, who do not take the vaccine every year. All right, so there's conclusions that researchers can draw from the results that they're going to receive after 4 years. So based on some results, the researcher can maybe make conclusions on whether the flu vaccine helps elders in Washington state increase their immune system in order to resist their body from getting the flu virus. Again, you need to have the result, and from the result, they can make conclusions using statistical inferential statistics. The next part of the second sections of chapter 1 discuss how data are collected. So data are collected using different methods. So the first method that you can use is it's called simulations. This is the method of collecting data when you use a mathematical model or a physical model to reproduce a conditions of situations or process. To produce conditions of situation or process. So this collecting data process often involves the use of computers. For examples, an automobile manufacturers use simulations with dummies to study the effects of crashes on humans. So the objective of this study is the effect of crashes on humans. That means you cannot do an experiment on human, right? You need to use computers to simulate different scenarios with different conditions of situations in order to produce possible responses. And you collect the data from those simulations for this particular study, the study that you cannot experiment on human. Okay. This is an example number one is the computer simulations of an earthquake. And I will play it. Can we play? Okay.
Much of the movement we detect in the Bay Area takes place near the San Andreas Fault, but many other faults cut through the California coastal region, forming a complex network of fractures. The Hayward Fault runs nearly parallel to its more famous neighbor to the west. The Hayward accounts for a portion of the movement between the Pacific Plate and the North American Plate, and it has shifted only slightly since its last great earthquake in 1868. What might an earthquake look like along the Hayward Fault? Scientists use computers to simulate such an event. This simulation depicts one scenario, one possibility. If 50 miles of the fault were to rupture, it would lead to an event about 1/16 the intensity of the 1906 earthquake. The resulting ground movement depends on many local details. Scientists take into account the proximity of mountains, the type of soil, and other factors to calculate the shaking intensity.
So as you can see that without the use of computers, without simulations, it's almost impossible for us to measure the intensity of an earthquake, possible intensity of an earthquake if it's happened somewhere. All right, so that's the first method that helps collect data, simulations. The second method is the survey. A survey is an investigation of one or more characteristics of a population. It's a very popular method that a lot of people use to collect data. Most surveys carry out on people by asking questions, right, to collect responses. And most common types of survey are done by interviews, internet, using phone, email, or mail. Should be just mails. All right. But then again, when you're trying to collect data, when you are trying to come up with questions to ask in your survey, you need to be cautious about wording the questions so that it will not lead to a biased results. For an example, if you want to conduct a survey asking Tacoma residents about their opinions whether or not climate change will affect the next generations, the questions in the survey could be, do you think that climate change will affect the next generations? Now, this is more or less like a non-biased questions, right? Do you think whether it will affect the next generations? Because you do not impose any suggestions into these questions. So the answer can be, yes, I think so. I was like, no, I don't think so. So there's yes and no. And then they can explain the reasonings behind the answer. We look at example number 13. This asks you to recognize a biased questions and determine whether a survey question is biased. If the question is biased, suggest for better wording. Okay. The first question is, why does eating whole grain foods improve your health? It's biased because it's already suggested that eating whole grain food improves health. So a better wording for this question can be, do you think that eating whole grain food would improve your health? Right. All right. The next question is, how much do you exercise during an average week? How much do you exercise? This doesn't seem like exercise is good for you or not, right? It's just like neutrally asking how much do you exercise. So this is non-biased questions. You can say 0 hours, 20 minutes a week, 2 hours a week, and 5 hours a week. Your responses are not being imposed by the questions.